Listen to me. Make sure you control the center.
Thanks, Monica. In this lecture, I'm going to explain a few things about the center of the board in the opening. My first piece of advice is that on your very first move, you occupy the center with either your e-pawn or your d-pawn, like this, for example, or like this, 2 squares forward. The reason for this, you already know. The first opening principle is control of the center, and by center I mean those 4 green squares and also the expanded center, which is all those other squares. So a logical first move is d4 or e4, like in this game. Now, if you are playing with black pieces, I suggest that you do exactly the same. You do e5, you play e5 here. And now, the most logical move for white is knight to f3, developing a piece. f3 and c3 are the best squares for white's knights, and c6 and f6 are the best squares for black's knights. Now, the e5 pawn is under attack, so a logical move for black is knight to c6. And there are a whole variety of moves here for white. Bishop to c4 and bishop to b5 are popular, and so is d4. But we'll be taking a look at these later on. Let's see another game. Now, after e4, black can play knight to f6. But this is a dangerous move unless you know this opening really well, because white can advance his pawn now, and then that knight will be forced to move somewhere else. In this game, white prefers to go knight to c3, defending his pawn. And black should probably go e5 now, but instead of that, he went g6. And this is what happens when you don't have control over the center. Those central pawns have a desire to advance at all times, and unless you stop them, they will advance, forcing your pieces to retreat. Like maybe that knight has to move back to g8, which is not a good move because white's got that pawn in the center. He can play d4 next move. He's got a really good position. In this game, however, white didn't play e5, which I think is the best move. He actually played d4, which is not bad, I suppose, but black should do something about the threat of e5 now and should probably go d6. Instead of that, he went bishop here. And now, after e5, black is in trouble because his best move is knight to g8, and if he moves his knight to h5 on the edge of the board, that's not a very good move because this is what happens. g4. The knight is now lost as it has no retreat. And this game was a direct consequence of not having good control over the center. Let's move on. e4, e5, knight f3, knight to c6, bishop to c4, good move. So bishop to c5 makes a lot of sense. And now c3, threatening to go d4 with 2 pawns in the center. Knight to f6, attacking the pawn, is a good move. So d4 is the book move now. Pawn takes, and black should now go bishop to b4 check, attacking the king, and then possibly taking this pawn on e4. It's a book line, it's very well known, it has been deeply studied, but in this game black decided to go bishop to b6. And look at those pawns. This is what happens when you don't have the center under control. White's got several good moves here. The most obvious one is e5, attacking the knight. And now, where does the knight go? The problem is the knight cannot go to a central square like d5 because the bishop would take it, obviously. And knight here is not a good idea either because bishop here is a nasty move. Attacking the knight has no retreat. He can't go to g5 because white's got his own knight on f3 and the bishop on c1. So the only move here would be f5. This move is kind of awkward because white now controls this dangerous diagonal and that king is going to be in trouble later on. So what does black do? Maybe he can try d5, attacking the bishop. But here the problem is we can take the knight on f6. When he takes there, we advance in the center. And now that knight on c6 is under attack. And that's a problem because it can't go here, which at first sight looks like a good move because the knight's coming to d3, or maybe he just wants to take that pawn. But then we've got this nasty check. and then the knight is lost. So what does the knight do? Maybe retreat here, but then we're going to take on g7 anyway. So the knight went over here, again a knight on the edge of the board, and white can simply take on g7, rook to g8, we castle, and after he takes here, we play this move, and black's position is looking really bad. For example, the rook moves here, attacking the bishop. Then we go rook to e1. That king is in trouble, can't go to f8 because the bishop is here. And if the king comes over here, this knight check is just winning. Where does the king go? If the king goes to the e file, for example here, we can take the rook with check, discover check, or even go knight to c6, which is a double check. The queen is going to be lost. Or if the king moves over here, we've got a simple knight fork like this. So this position after knight to e5 is completely lost for black. And again, this was a direct consequence of not having a good control over the center. That's what happens when you don't control the center.